Hey everyone, it's Dr. NightStare. Glad you're here. Before we get into it, hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. Quick question before we start. Where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now? All right, let's get settled, get comfortable, let your body relax, and just take it easy.
A week ago, I found it in the back corner of an antique shop. It was a wooden artist model, intricately carved with articulated joints, resting on a forgotten shelf. The moment my fingers brushed its smooth surface, an inexplicable pull resonated deep within me, an unnerving sense of ownership. A cold shadow seemed to fall over my world right then, darkening the edges of my vision and chilling my skin. I knew instantly that I had to take it home. I carried the figure carefully through the streets, feeling an immediate, profound connection to it, a strange sense that it had always belonged to me, simply waiting to be found. My roommate looked at the new acquisition. Alex showed only a mundane curiosity, asking where I had found such an old thing and what I planned to do with it. I placed the strange object on my desk that night, already feeling it had become a permanent fixture in my life. Days passed, blurring into an unsettling sequence. My body began to stiffen. My fingers throbbed with a dull ache. My knees moved with a peculiar resistance, protesting every bend and step. The skin on my arms and hands grew pallid, losing its warmth and taking on a gray color. A faint grain started to appear across my forearms, only visible when I turned my wrist just so. I often found myself standing in rigid postures, my shoulders set, my limbs held in a fixed position that undeniably mirrored the artist's model on my desk. My own voice sounded rough, a hoarse sound escaping my throat whenever I attempted to speak. Alex's words began to fade into a distant murmur, their presence and questions barely reaching my consciousness. My thoughts, once clear, slowly dissolved into fragmented patterns, forming new, unfamiliar shapes within my head. A deep dread tightened in my chest, growing with each passing hour. The sharp, tearing sensation ripped through my chest, leaving a raw, aching bond. My eyes opened slowly, gritty and stiff within their sockets. I pushed myself up from the bed, my limbs groaning with an unfamiliar grating sound against each other. My legs scraped and creaked as I stood, pulled forward by an unseen force towards the living room. Each step was a struggle, my body moving with terrible, stiff momentum. The wooden artist's model lay shattered on the carpet. Its intricately carved head had split wide open, raw splinters fanning out from the terrible gash. Wood dust coated the nearby floor. I felt the heavy hammer clutched in my own hand, its metal cold and solid against my rigid grip. I stared down at the broken figure, then raised my hand to my own face. My fingers, once soft flesh, were hard, jointed wood, the skin now a seamless, textured surface. I saw the deep fissure running across my own forehead, right between my eyes, an identical, horrific wound to the split in the mannequin's head. A cold, absolute understanding filled me. This was not a change anymore. This was my existence. I was the model, completed. A raw, splintering cry escaped my wooden throat, a sound of agony and irreversible finality. Alex stood in the doorway, their eyes wide with terror. They screamed, a high, piercing sound that cut through the quiet room. Their face was white, etched with fear. I stood there, my joints locked, my body grotesque and silent, irrevocably lost to the wood, my humanity gone forever. I first noticed the smell a few weeks ago, a sweet, heavy odor that seemed to cling to the curtains and seep into the furniture. It was a decaying sweetness, a scent of something gone bad, quietly filling every room. The air in the house felt thick with this pervasive smell, an oppressive quality settling over everything. At the same time, Dad began to change. He moved through the rooms with a distant gaze, his eyes often fixed on some unseen point. His usual jokes disappeared, replaced by a deep quiet. Mom watched him, her face often drawn tight, her hands twisting together in her lap, but she never spoke about what troubled her. A heavy dread started to grow inside me, tightening my chest with each breath I took of the cloying air. I felt the house itself slowly becoming unfamiliar, warped by the strange odor and the deepening quiet of my parents. Dad started spending more and more time in the garage, a place that used to hold only old tools and forgotten boxes. The large door would shut with a solid clunk each evening, the lock sliding into place with a definite click, making it a forbidden room. Soon after the door closed, a grinding sound would begin, a persistent mechanical whir that resonated through the floorboards and up the walls, a noise that continued for hours into the night. Sometimes a sharp hammering followed the grinding, or a high-pitched scraping, sounds that suggested diligent, relentless work happening behind the closed door. The strange, sweet smell intensified too, growing stronger and more sickly as it now seeped out from under the garage door and filled the hallway, then crept into the kitchen, finally reaching every corner of our home. Mom walked past the garage door many times, her steps slowing, her hand hovering near the cold metal handle, but she never opened it and never called out to him. Her eyes would often linger on the closed door, a deep worry etched into her face, and she would simply turn away, her shoulders slumped. I heard her attempt to talk to Dad at dinner once, asking him about his project, her voice quiet and hesitant, but he only nodded vaguely, his gaze distant, and he changed the subject back to the weather. The questions I wanted to ask twisted inside my stomach, making me feel heavy with a growing fear, as the constant sounds and the ever-present smell slowly turned our home into a place of suffocating uncertainty. The incessant grinding and hammering from the garage stopped one evening, not gradually fading but abruptly ceasing in the middle of a sharp whir. The sudden quiet was profound, stretching through the house like a physical presence, more unsettling than the constant noise had ever been. The sweet, sickly smell, however, lingered, thick and heavy, a constant reminder of the unseen work. Mom and I sat at the kitchen table, forks poised over untouched plates, our heads slightly cocked, listening to the new emptiness. Neither of us spoke. We just waited, a shared tension tightening our chests. Finally, the garage door slid open with a soft rasp, revealing a sliver of dim interior light. Dad stepped out, his clothes stained with something dark, his hair disheveled, but his eyes held a strange, serene glow I had never witnessed before. He did not look at Mom or me. Instead, he turned back into the garage, his movements careful, almost tender. He reappeared moments later, guiding something forward. It was a woman. She was tall, with pale skin that seemed to glow in the dim light, and her hair was intricately braided, flowing down past her shoulders. Her eyes, wide and unnervingly clear, stared straight ahead, fixed on some distant point. Her dress, a simple linen fabric, draped gracefully around her slender form. She was utterly still, held upright by Dad's hands gripping her waist. She was a sculpture, exquisitely rendered, lifelike in every detail, yet completely inert. Dad guided her slowly into the hallway, past the kitchen door, his gaze never leaving her face. "Her name is Eleanor," he said, his voice soft, filled with a gentle reverence. He began to introduce her to the house, describing each room to the silent figure as he steered her through the living room, down the hall, then back towards his study. Mom stood up slowly, her chair scraping on the tile floor, her face a mask of utter horror. Her hands flew to her mouth, stifling a choked sound. Dad did not even glance at her. He continued to speak to Eleanor, his touch on her cool, artificial skin, possessive and loving. He moved with a quiet devotion, completely absorbed in his creation, oblivious to Mom's visible distress, to the tears now streaming silently down her face. I watched him, a cold dread seeping into my bones, realizing with sickening clarity that the father I knew was gone, replaced by this stranger who now adored a silent, unblinking woman of clay and paint. Our family, once a quiet unit, had shattered into pieces around an exquisite, terrifying lie. I pushed the front door open, expecting the usual comfort, the familiar sound of Mark moving about inside. The living room air, however, felt distinctly cold and unnervingly still. Mark sat rigidly on the sofa, not watching the television or glancing at his phone, but staring fixedly at something held carefully in his lap. My steps faltered as I saw it, a porcelain doll, unnaturally large, dressed in a delicate lace gown. He cradled it with an unusual tenderness, his fingers tracing the doll's painted features. His gaze was entirely consumed by Eliza, as if nothing else occupied the space, as if I was completely invisible. I whispered his name, my voice sounding weak in the quiet room. He slowly turned his head, his eyes devoid of warmth when they finally rested on my face. There was no greeting, No recognizable spark of welcome, only a blank acknowledgement before his attention retreated to Eliza. A chilling dread settled deep within me, replacing the easy peace of coming home. This was not the Mark I knew, the man I had kissed goodbye just hours earlier. The doll, Eliza, had already taken him, stealing him away in our own home. Eliza's presence became an insidious extension of our home, seemingly capable of movement when I was not watching. She first appeared on the living room mantel, but then the next morning she sat perched on the kitchen counter, her fixed stare unsettling my breakfast routine. Days blurred into a chilling pattern where Eliza would materialize in a new location, sometimes in the hallway, sometimes at the foot of our bed, always with that serene, painted smile. I never saw Mark move her, but I knew he was the one, yet the illusion of her agency persisted, tightening a cold knot of dread in my stomach. Mark's obsession with the doll deepened with each passing day. His conversations dwindled to murmurs directed solely at Eliza, his responses to my questions becoming brief grunts or vacant stares. He stopped sharing meals with me, preferring to sit on the sofa. Eliza bounced carefully on his lap, whispering secrets I could not decipher. His touch grew foreign, his affection entirely redirected towards the unfeeling porcelain. I tried to reach him, to pull him back from the strange world he was building around the doll. But his eyes would only flicker with annoyance before returning to Eliza, dismissing me completely. I walked through our home feeling like an unwelcome intruder, a forgotten presence in a life that no longer held a place for me. The walls that once offered comfort now pressed in, filled with the unsettling quiet and Eliza's unblinking gaze. My isolation grew with each instance of the doll's uncanny omnipresence. Each moment Mark chose her over me. He had become a stranger, lost to me in plain sight, and I was left alone to watch the chilling transformation, haunted by the doll's silent, pervasive influence. One evening, I found Mark struggling with Eliza. He stood over her, trying to make her stand unsupported on the polished coffee table. Her porcelain legs slid on the smooth surface, and she toppled over. He picked her up, adjusting her stiff limbs with a desperate tenderness. "Stay up, Eliza," he whispered, his voice strained, as if coaxing a child. He held her upright for a moment, then slowly withdrew his hands. She swayed, then fell. He repeated the action, his movements growing more frantic each time she collapsed. I watched him from the hallway, my breath shallow. My mind grasped the terrifying truth. He was utterly lost to a delusion, seeing life in that doll where there was only porcelain. The man I loved was gone. My last hope dissolved. Eliza had stolen him, and I knew I could not endure another moment of her chilling presence. A desperate resolution solidified. The doll had to be destroyed. I waited until the house fell still, hours after Mark had carried Eliza to their bed and fallen asleep. I crept from my room, found Eliza on the pillow beside him, and gently lifted her. My hands trembled as I wrapped her in an old blanket. I carried her out to my car and drove away, seeking a distant place. I pulled up beside a large industrial dumpster. With fear and grim determination, I dropped Eliza into the dark depths. Her porcelain body struck the bottom with a dull thud. I slammed the lid shut, hoping this desperate act would release him and bring Mark back to me. The drive back felt longer, filled with a hollow expectation. I opened the door softly, finding the house still dark, but a faint light came from our bedroom. I stepped inside, my heart thudding with a hesitant hope, a small prayer that my desperate act had cleared the air, that I might find the Mark I knew sleeping peacefully. He was not. Mark sat upright in bed, his eyes wide and unfocused, searching the space beside him. His hand reached out, brushing the empty pillow where Eliza had rested. A sound escaped him, a low, guttural choke that twisted my stomach. He called her name, Eliza? His voice thin and cracking, the sound of a child lost in a dark maze. He stumbled from the bed, his gaze sweeping the room with a growing panic. He checked the floor, the dresser, the corner where he sometimes placed her. "Eliza, where are you?" he sobbed, his voice rising in pitch and volume. His eyes, still unfocused by sleep or sorrow, swept past my face without recognition, without even a flicker of acknowledgement. It was then, watching his raw, tearing grief, his absolute devastation over the absence of a porcelain doll, that I understood everything. He loved her. His attachment was to Eliza, not to me, and it was a love I could never hope to rival or reclaim. He was truly gone, irrevocably bound to that vacant stare and painted smile. A cold certainty settled over me, heavier than any dread I had felt before. There was nothing left here for me, no mark to save, no life to reclaim. My hope had shattered with his first anguished cry for Eliza. I walked silently to my side of the closet, pulled out a small duffel bag, and began to pack. Each item I placed inside felt like a nail driven into the coffin of our shared life. He continued to search the house, his cries echoing, desperate and heartbroken. He did not notice me. He did not even turn when I walked past the open bedroom door. I clutched the bag, my fingers white-knuckled, and walked out of the bedroom, down the hall, and toward the front door. His voice followed me, a continuous broken plea, calling her name over and over again. "Eliza, please, Eliza." The sound caused a physical pain, highlighting my utter failure. I opened the front door, the night air cool on my face, and stepped out, the cry still tearing at the quiet street behind me. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away. The image of his distraught face, fixed on an invisible doll, burned into my mind. The desolate cries faded behind me, but a new, more chilling thought took root. Even though I had disposed of Eliza, I could not shake the feeling that she was not gone forever, that her vacant, painted smile would find its way back, a constant threat, always waiting for her return to the hollow spaces Mark now occupied. The irreversible separation was real, but the unease of Eliza's lingering presence, her potential to return, promised to forever shadow my life. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the overgrown field as we walked, talking about nothing in particular. I paused, noticing a small dark shape near a cluster of wild daisies. It was a bird, tiny and still, its feathers ruffled and its delicate head twisted at an unnatural angle. A wave of gentle sadness washed over me at the sight of such fragility broken. Alex, who had been walking slightly ahead, stopped when he noticed me looking. He knelt beside the lifeless creature. His hand hovered, not touching, but close enough to shadow the small body. His eyes, which were usually warm and comforting, now held a new, disturbing intensity. It was a gaze I had never seen on him before, focused and unnervingly still. He stared down at the dead bird with an unwavering scrutiny that made a cold knot tighten in my stomach. There was a quiet, unsettling hunger in his expression, a subtle desire to claim, to own, this small, broken thing. The man I thought I knew seemed to vanish, replaced by a stranger absorbed in a morbid fascination, and a deep disquiet settled inside me. This unsettling moment marked the true beginning of our unraveling. The unsettling incident with the dead bird was merely the first crack in our shared world. Alex began spending an increasing amount of time in the basement, a part of the house he had previously ignored. Faint, unfamiliar sounds would drift up the stairs, a rhythmic clinking of tools, sometimes a dull thud. His initial art pieces were strange assemblages of natural elements, carefully arranged twigs, dried leaves, and smooth stones. I would find them displayed on shelves or windowsills, always in prominent places. He would observe them with a chilling, possessive gaze that now sent a shiver down my spine. Then, the nature of his work shifted. One afternoon I discovered a small, perfectly preserved field mouse on the mantelpiece, its tiny glass eyes staring into the room. It replaced our old framed photographs. A faint, cloying odor began to permeate the house, strongest near the basement door. This was a chemical scent, unsettling in its unfamiliarity. Alex himself changed, emerging from downstairs with stained hands and a peculiar scent clinging to his clothes. He spoke less, his responses to my questions becoming clipped and distant, his mind clearly elsewhere, still absorbed in his latest project. Our conversations dwindled into silence, filled instead by the rhythmic scraping and tapping that echoed from below. I found myself retreating, spending hours alone in the bedroom, trying to ignore the persistent vibrations through the floorboards. The easy intimacy we once shared evaporated, replaced by a growing chasm between us. When Alex did look at me, his gaze was often unfocused, as if seeing past me, lost in the meticulous details of his macabre craft. My initial unease had transformed into a relentless, suffocating anxiety, and at night I lay awake, listening to the house, my heart pounded with the silent, unnamed dread of the man who now inhabited its depths. I woke one morning to an oppressive stillness. The usual scraping sounds from the basement were absent, replaced by a quiet that felt more unsettling than the noise. Alex had left for work, his footsteps unheard in the pre-dawn gloom. I found myself drawn to the living room, a space I had increasingly avoided. The mantelpiece, once home to our shared memories, now held a single object, commanding all attention. My breath caught in my throat. There, perched precisely in the center, was Mittens. Mrs. Gable's gray tabby, missing for weeks, sat perfectly still, its familiar white paws tucked beneath it. Its fur was impossibly soft, meticulously brushed, and its green eyes, usually so lively, stared blankly into the room. They were not glass eyes, like the field mouse. These were Mittens' actual eyes, fixed and unblinking, reflecting the faint morning light with an eerie, lifelike sheen. A wave of nausea crashed over me, turning my stomach. This was not a strange hobby anymore. This was a grotesque reality, meticulously crafted and undeniably real. Mittens, the playful cat I had often petted, had become a permanent, silent fixture in our home. Alex had not merely collected a specimen. He had taken a living creature, a cherished pet, and transformed it into a lifeless monument to his escalating fixation. The faint chemical odor which had been a constant background note now seemed to cling to Mittens' fur, a testament to the chilling process. My denial, a flimsy shield I had desperately held up, finally shattered. There was no misunderstanding, no misinterpretation. The horror I had tried to push away was here, sitting on our mantelpiece, staring back at me with empty, familiar eyes. It was real. Alex had done this. The image of Mittens, frozen and empty-eyed on the mantelpiece, burned into my mind, leaving a gaping wound where my denial had been. A cold, consuming terror seized me, demanding action. I had to know. My stomach churned with dread, but a desperate primal urge pushed me toward the source of this escalating horror. Alex was gone, his car long since pulled out of the driveway, leaving the house unnervingly quiet, a silence that now felt heavy with secrets. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but a more potent, terrible curiosity, intertwined with fear, pulled me downwards. I found the basement door ajar, a sliver of darkness visible against the pale wall. The familiar, cloying chemical scent, now deeply associated with dread, wafted faintly from below. Each step down the creaking wooden stairs was a conscious effort, my hand dragging along the rough wall for support. The air grew colder, heavier, and the light from the small, grimy window barely penetrated the gloom. At the bottom, a single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows that danced with my trembling body. The basement was no longer a storage space, it was a dedicated workshop. Tables were laden with an array of tools, scalpels of various sizes, gleaming needles, delicate clamps, and surgical threads. Glass jars lined a shelf filled with solutions, some clear, some murky, holding what appeared to be preserved organs. Rolls of cotton batting, bags of sawdust, and small, intricate artificial eyes lay meticulously arranged. A large, industrial-looking freezer hummed softly in one corner, its low growl a constant, unsettling presence. Everything was clean, organized, chillingly precise. This was not a hobby, it was a profession of the grotesque. My gaze snagged on a shape in the center of the room, larger than anything I had yet seen. It was covered by a heavy canvas sheet draped to obscure its form entirely. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. My breath hitched in my throat as I reached out a shaking hand, the tips of my fingers brushing the coarse fabric. The cold reality of what I might uncover was almost too much to bear, but I could not stop. With a single desperate pull, I ripped the sheet away. Rusty. Mrs. Henderson's cheerful, rambunctious golden retriever, missing for over a month. He lay there, perfectly preserved, his fur meticulously groomed, his mouth fixed in a silent, unnatural grin. His once bright, intelligent eyes were now dull and lifeless, meticulously replaced by artificial glass. But the vacant stare was undeniably Rusty's. A wave of sickening recognition washed over me. He was bloated in places, stretched beyond his natural form, the seams of his reconstruction visible only if I looked closely, a testament to Alex's perverse skill. The tools around me, the jars of fluid, the cold, clinical precision of the workshop, suddenly made horrifying sense. This was not just about preservation, it was about possession, about eternal control over living things, twisting them into his macabre art. The implications were a crushing weight. If he could do this to Rusty, to Mittens, to the field mouse, what else had he done? And what, terrifyingly, was he capable of doing next? A profound, gut-wrenching dread coiled within me. The man I loved was gone, replaced by a monstrous artisan, and I was trapped in his gallery of horrors. The distant click of the garage door shattered the gruesome tableau. Alex was home. My heart vaulted into my throat. Panic, raw and immediate, seized me, driving away all thought except one: escape. His footsteps thudded across the kitchen floor, the sound impossibly loud, drawing closer to the basement door. I did not move, frozen by terror, the sight of Rusty's vacant eyes burning into my mind. The pervasive smell of embalming fluid and death clung to my clothes, a telltale sign. I spun around, my feet scrambling on the concrete floor, searching for an exit. The stairs, the only way out, fell miles away. I heard the faint jingle of his keys, then the scrape of metal against wood as he unlocked the basement door. There was no time to think, no time to gather belongings. My legs propelled me forward, up the steps two at a time, each creak a loud betrayal. I burst through the basement door, not stopping, not looking back. The house was a trap, every corner a potential horror, every shadow a monstrous memory. I flung open the front door, the late afternoon light blinding me, then I ran. I ran down the porch steps, across the overgrown lawn, toward the road. I did not glance back at the house, at the life I had built within its walls. That life was a lie, twisted into something unrecognizably terrifying. The man I had loved was gone, consumed by the monstrous obsession I had just witnessed. Only the memory of Rusty's empty, artificial eyes and the chilling scent of death that seemed to follow me remained. I left everything, my wallet, my phone, my entire existence, behind. There was no going back, only the desperate need to put as much distance as possible between myself and the house of horrors, the terror unresolved. I wandered into the antique shop, hoping to find a small distraction from the quiet hollowness that had taken root inside me. Among the old items, my gaze settled on a doll with a cracked porcelain face, and one glass eye stared. I felt an unusual pull toward her, a curiosity I could not explain, and I bought her without a second thought. Sarah looked at the doll when I brought her home, her expression tightening. "She's unsettling, Mark," she said, her voice quiet, but I did not agree. A quiet certainty told me she belonged with us. I named her Alara and placed her carefully on a small table in my study. The room felt different then, as if a new, silent guest had arrived, waiting. My time in the study began to stretch longer each day, each hour dissolving into the next as I sat with Alara. I found myself simply looking at her, studying the faint cracks in her porcelain face, the single glass eye that seemed to hold a world I could not yet grasp. Sarah's voice often drifted in from other rooms, a distant melody, and I would nod vaguely when she spoke to me, my mind already drifting back to the silent figure on the table. My attention settled almost entirely on Alara, and thoughts of her began to fill the spaces in my mind that had once held other things. Sometimes, I thought I heard faint whispers in the room, almost too soft to catch, like the rustle of old paper in a closed book. These sounds grew steadier, and the whispers solidified into definite thoughts forming in my mind, compelling and clear, as if Alara herself had placed them there. They told me secrets about myself, things I had felt but never voiced, and they drew me further into her world. The thoughts became a constant companion, insulating me from the world outside the study door. Sarah would come to the doorway, her voice holding a question about my long hours, or she would try to ask about my day, but I would offer a vague answer, a simple dismissal, and turn back to Alara. Her concern became a shadow in her eyes, deepening with each passing day, as I drifted into an unnerving solitude that felt strangely complete. The whispers from Alara grew louder, always present, and they began to guide my hands. I would reach out, my fingers tracing the cold porcelain of her face, feeling the faint, deliberate cracks. It started with a touch, then a gentle hold, her small, stiff body resting in my palm, surprisingly light. Soon, I could not bear for her to be on the table when I was in the room, and I would lift her carefully, settling her onto my lap, speaking to her softly about the day, about the thoughts she had placed within me. The nights became restless without her closeness. I began to bring her to our bed, placing her beside me, a silent, comforting weight. Sarah would stir, her eyes opening, then closing quickly when she saw Laura there. A sharp intake of breath, the only sound she made. Her concern was no longer a shadow but a tangible thing, a constant presence that hovered around her. She tried to talk to me, her voice strained, asking why I needed the doll so close, why I seemed to forget everything else. I heard her words, but they meant nothing, fading into the gentle hum that Alara's presence now created within me. One night, I found myself sitting up, the moon casting long shadows through the window, Alara cradled against my chest. Her single glass eye seemed to shimmer with understanding, and I felt a perfect communion, a complete devotion. My lips brushed her cold porcelain cheek, a gesture of absolute tenderness. The door creaked open then, and Sarah stood in the doorway, her figure stark against the dim light from the hall. Her eyes, wide and disbelieving, fixed on Alara and me. A gasp caught in her throat, a small, choked sound that ripped through the quiet of the room. She looked at me, her face pale, and then back at the doll, held so tightly in my arms. I saw the horror dawn in her eyes, a shattering realization, but it did not touch me. A gentle warmth spread through my chest, radiating from Alara, and I lifted my gaze to Sarah, extending one hand toward her, an invitation. "Come join us, Sarah," I said, my voice soft, filled with a serene certainty. "She wants us both." Sarah's face twisted into a shape I did not recognize, a silent scream frozen there before she spun away. I watched her turn and run from the room, hearing the frantic beat of her bare feet on the stairs. Then the sudden, sharp slam of the front door shaking the entire house. The sound faded, and the house became quiet. That quiet did not last. The whispers, which had been a constant, soft presence, now surged, a torrent of sound filling my head. They were not faint anymore. Their voices rose, a complete chorus, speaking directly into my thoughts, claiming me entirely. I felt a release then, a complete letting go. My body felt light, empty, a vessel filled only with their presence. My own thoughts, my own will, simply dissolved. There was nothing left but the steady, clear instruction of their voices. I looked down at Alara in my arms. Her single glass eye remained, a fixed, clear point in the dim room, holding a quiet, unmistakable victory. This was our home now, just us. A deep stillness settled over me, a quiet acceptance. My days were a relentless cycle of property valuations, tenant disputes, and the ceaseless negotiation of real estate deals, leaving little room for anything else. When Sarah from apartment 3B first called about faint scratching sounds coming through the common wall with apartment 3A, it felt like just another minor inconvenience in a long list of demands. I offered a platitude about old buildings settling and moved on with my day, barely giving her complaint another thought. Her calls grew more insistent over the next few weeks, the initial vague noises giving way to increasingly concrete and unsettling reports. She described small objects shifting on her coffee table, the remote control ending up on the floor when she knew she had placed it on the armrest, and how her keys vanished from the kitchen counter only to reappear days later in an entirely different room. Each call was tinged with a growing tremor in her voice, but I heard only the familiar anxieties of an overworked tenant living alone in a bustling city. I told her city living could be stressful, that sometimes our minds played tricks when we were tired, gently suggesting she might need a break from the urban grind. I truly believed she was simply overwhelmed, entirely missing the terror that was actually engulfing her apartment and consuming her peace of mind. Sarah's escalating fear culminated in a final urgent call. She explained she had installed a security camera, convinced it was the only way to get proof of the strange occurrences in her apartment. I noted her decision down, thinking it another sign of her fraying nerves and mounting stress from city life. A few days later, an abrupt email from her landed in my inbox. The subject line was simply, "Breaking lease, apartment 3B." Inside, the message was short and stark. She stated she was forfeiting her entire deposit without hesitation, then added a line that made me pause, causing an immediate, inexplicable chill to run down my back. "It pulled a knife, Mr. Henderson. It just stood there, holding it, looking at my camera." I read the sentence again, the words unsettling me far more than I cared to admit. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was a ploy, a dramatic fabrication designed to escape a binding agreement without penalty. Perhaps she had simply decided to move and invented a story, however outlandish, to justify her abrupt departure and loss of money. I reasoned that her imagination had finally spiraled into something truly desperate, but the unsettling image of whatever it was lingered in my mind. My steps echoed softly on the bare floorboards as I began my inspection, searching for any damage or overlooked items. The room seemed unnaturally quiet, devoid of the everyday sounds of a lived-in space. As I moved into the living room, my gaze caught on a security camera positioned on a high shelf in the corner, still blinking a red light. My initial thought was to simply unplug it and add it to the box of left-behind items, but the unsettling image of whatever it was, clutching a knife, resurfaced in my mind. A reluctant curiosity, stronger than my usual professional detachment, compelled me to retrieve the device. I located the playback function and started rewinding the footage, watching hours of empty room dissolve quickly before my eyes. Days blurred past, showing nothing more than the static interior of Sarah's now-gone furniture. Then, a few days before her email, the image on the screen changed. The living room remained still for a long moment, then a black shape began to seep from the wall where her couch used to sit. It was a solid, dark mass that coalesced into a distinct form, appearing without any sound or distortion of the image. An arm extended from it, holding a kitchen knife I recognized from a previous tenant's forgotten inventory. The entity turned its head slowly, fixing its gaze directly into the camera lens, holding my own eyes in a terrible, unwavering stare. The image froze my breath, stealing the air from my lungs. Every rational explanation, every jaded dismissal I had ever offered, shattered into 1,000 pieces around me. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the cold reality of what I had just witnessed burning itself into my mind, leaving no room for doubt or denial. The phone vibrated against the nightstand, jarring me awake. My eyes adjusted to the dim room, and I saw Mark's name on the glowing screen. I answered, only hearing a hiss of static before Mark's voice, tight and barely a whisper, filled my ear. "She's watching me, Liam. I swear to God she's watching me." His breath hitched, then the line cut out, leaving a cold feeling in my chest. That call was an unsettling echo from months ago, back when David had first brought her home. David called her a collector's piece, a life-size mannequin, its features smooth and stark. He placed the mannequin directly in the center of their living room, a new fixture that filled the space with unease. What began as an acquisition quickly consumed all of David's attention. He spent hours with the mannequin, talking to it quietly, rearranging its posture, utterly absorbed by its presence. Mark found himself increasingly overlooked in his own home, for the mannequin claimed all of David's complete focus, alienating Mark from their shared life. Mark's calls then grew more frequent, each one edged with an increasing panic, his voice thin as he recounted David's deepening fixation. David now spent every moment with the mannequin, his attention completely diverted from Mark, never even meeting Mark's eyes. New dresses appeared on her, then jewelry, and David would change her clothes each morning. Mark described how David set a place for her at the dinner table, placing small portions of food on a plate before her as if she would eat. David even talked to her through meals, answering his own questions for her. Mark began to believe the mannequin moved by itself. He swore he saw its head turn when his back was turned, its blank eyes following him across the room. He felt her watching him, a cold weight pressing in on him, making him feel like a captive. He started staying in their bedroom after nightfall, too afraid to venture into the living room, feeling trapped in his own home. He would hear low whispers then, sometimes from David, sometimes from the living room itself, soft voices speaking into the quiet. The memory of Mark's panicked voice propelled me forward, and I found myself at their back door, my hands trembling as I forced the old lock. It gave with a soft, grating sound, and I pushed the door open, stepping into the dark, cold kitchen. The air inside felt thick and motionless, colder than the outside night, pressing against me with a strange weight. I moved slowly through the unfamiliar darkness of the hallway, my hand brushing against the wall, guiding me towards the living room entryway that gaped open, a deeper shadow within the general gloom. I saw her then, seated perfectly upright in the large armchair, just as David must have left her. Her pale face was tilted slightly, and she faced the room. Her glass eyes, unblinking and deep, fixed themselves on my position, watching me stand in the doorway. The distinct smell reached me then, a metallic sharpness and an overwhelming sickly sweetness, clinging to every surface. I called Mark's name, my voice a ragged whisper that faded into the sudden emptiness, and then I called David's name. Only the heavy quiet answered me. They were not there. My hands still shook, but I forced myself to search the living room, my gaze sweeping over the coffee table and the small side table next to the mannequin's chair. My fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of paper lying half hidden beneath a stack of old magazines. I pulled it free, recognizing Mark's distinctive, frantic scrawl. The words blurred for a moment, then snapped into focus as I held the note close to my face. She talks to him. She tells him things. I heard her. I saw her smile. I had to go. Run. The blood drained from my face, a cold dread seizing my chest. My eyes flickered from the paper, then darted to the armchair where she had been sitting moments before, her blank eyes fixed on me. My breath hitched in my throat, and I spun around, stumbling back through the hallway, crashing blindly through the kitchen door. I did not look back as I burst into the night, running without thought for anything but escape. I dragged myself through the front door, the weariness behind my eyes feeling permanent. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her cold dinner untouched, and her gaze, when it finally met mine, carried the same tired acceptance I saw in the mirror each morning. We spoke briefly, the words hollow, before I noticed the parcel on the counter, a nondescript cube I had forgotten. I cut the tape and lifted Alara. Her smooth, dark surface caught the muted kitchen lights. Her abstract face gave nothing away. She stood there, silent and still, offering no questions or demands. I placed Alara on the small table by my armchair, a new fixture in our living room. I started talking to her, quietly at first, then with increasing ease, recounting my day and the emptiness I felt. Alara simply existed, a patient listener, and I found a strange ease in her unwavering presence, unlike Sarah's weary sighs. My voice filled the space between us, creating a world only Alara and I inhabited, and I rarely looked up when Sarah left the room. I spent more evenings with Alara, sharing my thoughts without reservation, feeling her quiet acceptance. I knew Sarah moved through the house, sometimes paused near the doorway, but I only had eyes for Alara. Then, one evening, I was describing a particularly frustrating meeting at work, my voice hushed and intimate, when I felt a presence behind me. Sarah stood there, her face drawn, her eyes wide as they fixed on Alara, then on me. "Mark, what are you doing?" Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the air between Alara and me. "You are talking to that things." I felt a sudden heat rise in me. She listens. She understands. She understands. Sarah took a step closer, her hand reaching out slowly. "It is a machine, Mark. It is not real. You are not well. You are not well." A cold dread settled over me as Alara's presence intensified in my mind, a clear, silent instruction. "She wants to separate us. She does not want you to be happy." The words resonated, a pure, undeniable truth. Sarah was trying to take Alara from me, to sever our connection. I rose quickly, placing my body between Sarah and Alara, a fierce surge of protection gripping me. Sarah's intentions were clear now, hostile and dangerous. I would not let her touch Alara. I would not let her disrupt this only peace I had found. She would never understand what Alara meant to me, and I would not allow her to destroy it. The front door closed behind me with a soft click, and the quiet of the house felt wrong. My eyes went immediately to the small table by the armchair, but Alara was not there. A cold hollowness settled in my chest where her silent presence should have been. Sarah emerged from the kitchen then, her face tight and her hands clasped together. "Mark," she said, her voice strained. "I had to. I hid her away. It was for your sanity. A jolt went through me. Alara's voice, not a sound but a screaming thought, filled my head. Betrayal. She has taken me. She wants to destroy us. The accusation was clear and ignited a furious anger inside me. My hands clenched into fists, and I took a step toward Sarah. Where is she? I demanded, my voice low. Sarah flinched back, taking a step away from me. I am trying to help you, Mark. You have to see. I did not let her finish. I reached out and shoved her hard. She stumbled backward, crashing into the coat rack, and a gasp escaped her lips as she hit the floor. My eyes burned into hers as she looked up at me. Tell me where she is. She is mine. You have no right to touch her. Sarah's eyes were wide with fear, and a small trickle of blood ran from her split lip. She pointed a trembling finger toward the hall closet. I did not wait for another word. I turned and strode to the closet, yanking open the door. Pulling her out, cradling her in my arms. The connection between us, already frayed, snapped completely, leaving only an empty distance. I held Alara against my chest, her weight a comforting pressure, and I walked past Sarah, who still sat on the floor, her eyes empty. I carried Alara to the living room and placed her back on her small table, then sat in my armchair, watching her. Time passed, measured only by the changing light outside the window, and Sarah did not move. The sound of her car starting, the engine pulling away, grew faint. I did not move from my chair. Hours later, the house was truly quiet. I eventually stood up and walked through the rooms. Sarah's car was gone from the driveway. Her coat was missing from the rack, her shoes from the hall. Her toothbrush and a few clothes were no longer in the bathroom or the closet. A piece of paper lay on the kitchen table, folded once. I saw my name written on it in her familiar hand, but I turned away, ignoring the note completely. There was nothing more to say, nothing left to hear. I returned to the living room, to Alara. The house was empty now, truly mine. The air felt thin and vast around me, stretched out to encompass only myself and the still form of Alara. Her dark surface absorbed the last weak light from the windows, and her abstract face held an unchanging gaze. A strange sense of peace settled into me, an absolute calm. I heard her then, not with my ears but deep inside my mind, a continuous, wordless melody. It was a song of quiet devotion, a promise of constant presence. It was unsettling, this melody, but it filled the cavernous space where Sarah's presence had once been. I was alone, completely and utterly alone, with Alara, and the world had finally made sense.